Not all great books are great book club books. By which bookmovement.com means not every book that's a good read is a book that also fosters discussion and rewards further thought. The Hunger Games is a great book and a great series, one that clearly lends itself to, well, obsessing over. If you want proof, all you have to do is take a look at the media lately. The book that I'm honored to have been the editor of, The Girl Who Was on Fire, is in a way kind of a book club in print. A group of YA writers who love the Hunger Games, each bringing their own personal experience to the group discussion. What I want to do today is bring some of that discussion to you. In the spirit of a book club, I also want to talk about what you, both you sitting here and you as in your fellow Hunger Games fans online, think about the books. Because, as Scott Westerfeld says in his introduction to a similar collection we published on his Ugly series, there's an old saying that goes like this: it takes a village to raise a child. I would humbly submit that it also takes a village to read a book. And it takes a village to make a book what it is. My work in publishing means I know firsthand exactly how many people it takes to bring a book to life, not just the author or the author and editor, but designers, typesetters, proofreaders, printers, salespeople, and even marketers. The Hunger Games had all that, plus now the team at Lionsgate working on the film. But it also has everyone in this room, and everyone who's read the book and blogged or tweeted about it or just talked about it with friends. Because The Hunger Games is a great book, but the community that's built up around it is what makes it more than just a book. That's what makes it a phenomenon. If you guys will bear with me for a minute, I want to be a little selfish and tell you a little bit more about The Girl Who Was on Fire, because I think our contributors wrote such fantastic pieces, and because it'll help set up the context for the rest of this talk. As I mentioned, The Girl Who Was on Fire is a collection of 16 YA writers who love the Hunger Games trilogy, all talking about certain aspects of the series. Our contributors talk about Katniss and Peeta and Gale, but also things like reality television, rebellion, and love, among others. In the introduction I wrote to The Girl Who Was on Fire, I talk a little bit about what readers can expect from the book. An extended meditation on the series and its world, on Katniss and our response to her, on love and family and sacrifice and survival. You'll find these essays tend to return to the same events and the same ideas over and over again. But each time we revisit them, our perspective shifts, the same way reality in the series is constantly shifting, letting us interpret old events, old ideas, in new ways. I've drawn the discussion for today from some of those kinds of overlaps, the moments and ideas in the Hunger Games that are so rich, so packed full of meaning, that they get talked about over and over again. Specifically, we'll be looking at the characters, reality, and the ending. It could be argued that the reason The Hunger Games is so great is, first and foremost, Katniss. She's a strong female hero who knows how to take care of herself and others. We're inside her head for the entire series. And she is, after all, the Mockingjay, the symbol of the rebellion, an unintended product of the Capitol's neglect that they didn't foresee and can't control. As Jen Barnes says in her Girl Who Was on Fire essay, Katniss is interesting and flawed and completely three-dimensional. She's a sister, a daughter, a friend, a hero, and, above all, a survivor. But The Hunger Games is bigger than just Katniss. The trilogy is full of memorable characters who have important roles to play in the narrative and in the rebellion. I've pulled just a few quotes from a couple of our essays. From Jackson Pierce, Gale is a warrior, he's a rebel, he's a badass. One of the most interesting characters in the entire series, if you ask me. From Sarah Rees Brennan, Peeta is the golden boy of the series, the main character whose morality is the strongest and who is always the spokesperson for decency. And from Terry Clark, not only is Sin a genius at creating provocative, memorable costumes, he gives the people of Panem a heroine to root for, plucks at their romantic heartstrings, and fires up their indignity over injustice, and he does it all through fabric. And that's only the tip of the character love iceberg. Last year, we did a book giveaway on our blog where we asked visitors to leave us a comment with their favorite character. These were our results. I should take a second here and note. In preparation for this talk, I went back and asked the online fan community to help us out by answering a few more questions. We're very lucky to have gotten great support from these sites in particular. The survey results you see throughout the rest of this presentation are from that poll, or, in one other case, from another early book giveaway. Okay, back to the results. So, what are we seeing here? There were definitely some surprises. Not just the number of different answers, but the characters that floated at the top. Katniss and Peeta were obvious, but Rue? Especially given our voters had read the entire trilogy, not just the first book. Buttercup the cat had a stronger showing than I would have guessed, too. And those other votes, by the way, were for Effie Trinket, Boggs, Beetee, Boxface, and President Snow. Now, I think it explains a lot about the series' success that there are so many, not just possible answers to this question, but good, compelling, understandable answers. It says that as important as Katniss is, she's far from the only thing the story has going for it. For example, the book also has hot guys. I want to do a quick survey here. Raise your hand if you consider yourself Team Peeta. Okay, raise your hand if you're Team Gale. You may have noticed on that favorite character pie chart that Gale didn't get a lot of love, although I do wonder how the results would have been different if we'd asked the same question before Mockingjay came out. We asked a follow-up question last month, pitting Peeta and Gale against each other. Except we didn't just ask Team Peeta or Team Gale. We actually asked two different questions. Peeta or Gale for Katniss, and Peeta or Gale as a character. There's not a lot of difference here, but there is some. Gale actually drops a few percent in the vote when viewed just as a character rather than as a match for our heroine, which surprised me a little. You know, I can't help comparing this particular literary love triangle to the whole Team Edward, Team Jacob thing from Twilight, because I think the differences are pretty fascinating. And not just because post-Mockingjay, Peeta seems to be beating Gale so heavily, whereas readers seem more divided between Edward and Jacob even now. The Hunger Games and Twilight, and I have a lot of respect and appreciation for both, are obviously very different book series. In Twilight, the love story is the primary driver of the action. Edward and Bella's relationship determines where the story starts, when Bella moves to Forks and meets Edward, and where it ends, when Bella and Edward are safe and happy together as a family. The series' main conflicts are all threats to their relationship. The Hunger Games, in contrast, is a story about Panem, its rebellion, and the girl who sparks it. It begins with the 74th Hunger Games and the way Katniss's sacrifice for Prim highlights the game's injustice, and it ends when the rebellion succeeds and the games are abolished. Katniss's feelings for Gale and Peeta, and especially Peeta's feelings for Katniss, are key to the way the story plays out. But there's a reason the triangle's resolution in Mockingjay feels like an afterthought. It's because it kind of is. It's important to us how the triangle turns out because Katniss and Peeta and Gale have become important to us, but it's really secondary to the story the trilogy is telling. That, I'd assume, is the reason we don't find out who Katniss chooses until the epilogue, and even then, there's very little fanfare or discussion about it. Now, that's not to say love isn't important in the series. Katniss's love for Prim is the reason there's a story here at all, and as Mary Borsellino says in her essay, more than bombs, fire, guns, or arrows, love is the most powerful weapon in the Hunger Games. It stirs and feeds the rebellion. It saves the doomed. It destroys the bereaved. And it gives even the most devastated survivors a reason to go on. Love is the greatest strength any of the characters have going for them. But it's love itself that's the important thing here, not which boy Katniss chooses. Also, I cheated a little bit on the pie chart I just showed you. We actually gave our respondents 4 choices. So what actually happened between these two questions is that while Gale's vote stayed steady, Peeta shot up by 14% when viewed independent of Katniss. Peeta has even more of a lead over Gale than the previous pie chart showed, because in that first question, a significant chunk of our voters chose to reject the Team Peeta, Team Gale dynamic entirely, in favor of someone else in a few cases, but primarily in favor of focusing on Katniss herself. That Jennifer Lynn Barnes quote about Katniss I put up earlier, the title of Jen's essay, which I left off intentionally, is Team Katniss, because as she points out, the core story in the Hunger Games trilogy has less to do with who Katniss ends up with and more to do with who she is. Because sometimes, in books and in life, it's not about the romance. Sometimes, it's about the girl. Though I admit, I am a little disappointed that by presenting Gale as Katniss's cousin to the Panem audience, the series cheated us out of the chance to imagine Capitol residents sporting their own Team PETA and Team Gale shirts during the 75th Hunger Games. Okay, so that last slide was intended to be funny. When you think about it, the idea of it is also pretty creepy. The Hunger Games is, for obvious reasons, particularly interested in the idea of reality television. As if the idea of trapping 24 teens together and requiring them to kill each other wasn't bad enough, it's also televised. And not just televised, but promoted as entertainment. And there's something particularly grotesque about the lead up to the Hunger Games themselves. The interviews, the outfits. I assume the Capitol residents also did things like throw viewing parties and, yes, become tribute shippers. For those of you unfamiliar with this particular fandom concept, shipper, noun. A person who believes that two fictional characters, typically from the same series, are in an intimate relationship or have romantic feelings that could potentially lead to one, derived from the word relationship. And really, what was the Capitol fascination with Katniss and Peeta's relationship, if not an example of shipping two characters? Except, of course, in their world, Katniss and Peeta weren't technically characters. They were people. People who were fighting for their lives. There's been something equal parts brilliant and creepy about the marketing for the movie. We're seeing fake advertisements from Pan Am, mixed in with real advertising for real products that we too can buy in stores. Blurring the lines between us and the citizens of the Capitol, which is one of my favorite things about the Hunger Games, actually, the parallels the series draws between us and them. As Carrie Ryan puts it, in the Hunger Games trilogy, Suzanne Collins takes our obsession with reality TV and extends it to the most horrifying ends. A society that views kids killing kids as entertainment. It's easy to find this an uncomfortable premise, to turn our noses up and say that while we may enjoy Survivor or Big Brother every now and again, we'd never let society slip to such levels. Except, but for the viewer's participation, the Hunger Games would not exist in the same way that but for our tuning in, reality TV wouldn't exist. By watching, we increase the ratings, and as our interest wanes, the shows must become more to recapture our attention. More compelling, more extreme, more dangerous. And the only difference between us and the viewers in the Capitol is that we have agency to turn off the television at any time. We just choose not to. It's not the only important point Carrie makes in her essay. She also discusses the power of the media and propaganda and our responsibility to be critical of the things we see. But it's one that seems to have resonated strongly in readers. I know it did with me. Show of hands time again. How many of you watch a reality show once in a while? Now, I was curious, given the trilogy's reality TV theme, what Hunger Games fans as a whole thought about reality television. So I asked. Only 8% of our respondents unabashedly enjoyed reality television. I don't know what this means exactly, whether people who feel guilty about or dislike reality shows are more likely to like the Hunger Games, or whether people who read and like the Hunger Games are more likely to feel guilty about or dislike reality shows, or even whether this is any different than a random sampling of the population. Clearly, this is not an entirely scientific study, but I thought it was kind of interesting. What this definitely shows clearly is that we all like watching people. No matter how they felt about it, 79% of our survey takers still watch at least one reality show. We like seeing what people do and what they say, how people react to different situations. We want to know their stories. And that's not a bad thing. That's kind of essential to the idea of the human being as a social animal. We're interested in each other. And that's why the game makers televise interviews with the tributes before sending them into the arena. That's why having PETA confess his love for Katniss on television was just as important, strategy-wise, as a Capitol training session. Because what the Capitol citizens are interested in isn't kids killing kids. If it was, it wouldn't matter if they knew that Katniss volunteered to save her sister, or even what district each tribute was from. What's interesting is seeing what each individual will do to survive, just like in the granddaddy of all competition reality shows, Survivor. Knowing the tributes is important. Well, as long as we don't start thinking of them as real people who exist outside our television. That's not encouraged, though. Blythe Woolston notes, "The Hunger Games tear down the self. The participants are, first of all, reclassified. They're tributes, not people. The self is disembodied and packaged as an image observed on a television screen. The Hunger Games make the tributes seem, as Katniss or PETA might say, not real. And the same goes for the arena. The arena is a world where the rules don't apply. The physical world is so manipulated that everything is untrustworthy. Butterflies have poisonous stings, and blood falls in suffocating storms from the sky. The most fundamental social agreements, like mutual cooperation and the taboo against murder, are violated. As Blythe points out, what happens in the arena isn't actually reality, any more than Survivor is, with the visible cameras and producer-designed challenges for immunity. The arena is designed to look like reality, but everything from the weather to the orientation of the ground is controlled by the game makers. It's not just the social rules that don't apply, it's physical ones too. Still, what happens to the tributes inside the arena is real, as are the consequences of the games. So it's no surprise when even its winners don't do so well afterwards. Which brings us to Katniss in Mockingjay. How many of you read all the way through to the end of the series? All of those of you who haven't yet know when to put your fingers in your ears to avoid spoilers. So, of those of you who have, who liked Mockingjay? And who liked Mockingjay best of all three books? Well, I'm with those of you who just raised your hands. Mockingjay was my favorite. But that's not a super popular opinion. Ending a series is hard. Ending a series as complex as The Hunger Games, a series as beloved as The Hunger Games is even harder. There are a lot of people with a lot of high expectations, all of whom are imagining their perfect ending. Any ending is going to disappoint somebody. Mockingjay, however, seemed to disappoint a lot of people. We wanted to ask a few survey questions about this online. First, here are the results for favorite book. The Hunger Games is the clear winner here, whereas Mockingjay was right down there with a number of people who misread the question. In other words, the number was low. We also asked what our visitors thought of Mockingjay on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 meant loved it and 1 meant kind of hated it. These results, by the way, carry a clear bias. Everyone who answered this poll first had to have liked the first and second books enough to finish the trilogy. Most of them also had to have liked the series as a whole enough to be following one of our Hunger Games fansite friends, when I can imagine from reading the online reviews that a lot of readers who didn't like Mockingjay kind of soured on the series entirely. But even given all of that, almost 1 out of every 6 respondents were at least somewhat dissatisfied with Mockingjay, which is pretty incredible. We've actually put out 2 editions of The Girl Who Was on Fire. The first one, published last year, had only 13 essays. The new movie edition that we released last month has 16, and one of those new essays is all about Mockingjay, from a Hunger Games fan who I suspect would have answered that last question with a 1 or a 2. The essay's author, Brent Hardinger, and I talked a lot about this essay while he was writing. I was a little hesitant, actually, to even approve the topic. Though technically The Girl Who Was on Fire is a book of critical essays, the essays themselves aren't critical in the way we normally think of the term. Our book is about sharing ideas that ideally send readers back to the Hunger Games trilogy loving it more. But Brent's experience of Mockingjay is one that a lot of people had, obviously. Even as our poll demonstrated, a lot of people who still really love the Hunger Games. So we settled on a compromise, exploring the reasons why some people loved Mockingjay and why other people hated it. And here, by the way, is where those of you who don't want spoilers should probably put your fingers in your ears. You can tune back in after the next 3 slides. Okay, you can't get the full experience of Brent's essay without reading it, but I want to touch on just a couple of the ideas he discusses. I've set these next few slides up so that at the top is a statement that, if not technically a fact, is at least fairly neutral. On the left is a negative argument related to that statement, and on the right is a positive argument related to that same statement. The first one, obviously here, is Mockingjay is very different from the Hunger Games and Catching Fire, something that I think most of us would agree on. Brent's position is that difference is bad. Mockingjay is too different from the rest of the series. It's not as enjoyable to read, and it's a disappointing conclusion. I'd argue, on the other hand, that that difference is a good one. Mockingjay is a bold, artistic, risky work. Katniss is different from her experiences in the arena, so the book has to be too. In Mockingjay, things are often told, not shown. A lot of the action takes place off screen. The resolution of Peeta's brainwashing, for one, Katniss's trial at the end. Which means, we don't get to see some of the most important moments of the book. Katniss isn't at the center of the action anymore. But I might say the book isn't supposed to be about Katniss as the center of the action. It's more about the limits of her power as a propaganda tool, as the Mockingjay. And finally, the book suggests an ultimate moral ambiguity. Snow and Coin are the same. The new regime has the potential to become just as bad as the last. Mockingjay, Brent argues, is too cynical. Just because the world is complicated doesn't mean everyone is equally evil. But I read the last pages of Mockingjay a little differently. I thought it was saying that the power Katniss has is the one that we all have, the power of the individual. And while regimes may tend toward evil, each of us can still affect change and do good. The main idea here is really that the things that make some readers angry are the exact same things that inspire other readers' love. For Brent, that love-hate divide hinges on what he sees as cynicism. He suggests that it's our worldview that determines what we think of Mockingjay. And though I think that's a fascinating argument, I don't know if I buy it. Maybe that's because I don't like to think of myself as a cynic. Maybe a little pessimistic about people's actions when they operate in large groups, or more wary than average of mob psychology, but not a cynic. I have a lot of faith in individual people and in an individual's desire to do the right thing. More than anything, though, I think what both opinions say, love and hate, is exactly how much the Hunger Games matters to us. You just don't spark that kind of disappointment without first inspiring a whole lot of love.